It is now my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Dave Perry, editor of the esteemed Aurora Sentinel, who has kept us informed of the goings-on in the eastern Denver suburb for as long as I've been around. With a sharp pencil and an even sharper sense of justice and humor, Dave's columns have often channeled the frustration that some of us have felt as the third largest city in Colorado and the most diverse city in the state has been run a bit as a laboratory experiment for conservatives and is essentially the last large municipality that they run due to nonpartisan elections and other things, and we'll get into all that stuff. But Dave Perry, welcome to the Get More Smarter podcast.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, first of all, Aurora's been making local, national, and even international headlines over the past several months, due in part to President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, I hate saying that, making claims about Venezuelan gangs having, quote, taken over the city, a claim that many Republican members of the city council and Mayor Mike Kaufman's administration have backed up and backed away from and doubled down on, depending on the day. First of all, what can you tell us about the truth of these claims and what is really going on in Aurora and more specifically at the apartment complexes in question, such as Whispering Pines and the edge of Lowry?
And has everyone been killed by Venezuelan gangs now in Aurora?
Most
Has anyone left?
Yeah.
There are about 400,000 people left. And
Good.
I can tell you that yesterday I went out for Bombay and came back safe, was not harassed, and drove several miles. And nobody shot at me, nothing happened. That's pretty much everybody's take here on living in Aurora right now. That what I hear is, man, the traffic really sucks. Are they ever going to go back to plowing streets the way they used to when it snows and stuff like that? As far as people really voicing serious concerns about Venezuela, that's some pretty slow channels. As far as up in northwest Aurora, though, and this is something we try to convince people of, that, man, this is not Aurora's first rodeo with having some really serious things happen up in 1 square mile out of the city's over 100 square miles of territory. I've been here for almost 30 years, and I can remember a time where it was so bad that they enacted laws that would allow people to close down crack houses to claim them as nuisances and take the property. And they tried to do that, not very successfully. But that's how serious the crack house problem was up in northwest Aurora at one point. They hired a consultant one time to come in from like some other place that dealt with lots of things, Detroit or something, who said, oh, here's what you need to do is close the cross streets so you no longer have drive-by shootings. If people can't drive by in their car, you solve the drive-by shooting problem. And so I'm following this guy around, and he's got a spray paint can, and he's spray painting on the ground saying, okay, we'll put a Jersey barrier here and one here. And I realized as a reporter, it's like, this guy's serious. It's like, you're going to close down and that's going to solve the crime problem. So they gave it a shot. And there is a notorious place in Aurora called Alton-Beeler Street, 17th and 16th and Alton-Beeler. And for years and years, that's been a place where a lot of very bad things have happened. But there's also mostly just a lot of poor people living up there, just trying to get by and do their stuff. So they actually put those Jersey barriers down there. This has got to be 20, 25 years ago. They're still there. They finally got rid of the Jersey barriers, but they built this impediment thing so that you can no longer drive by and shoot at somebody. And a few weeks ago, a very non-Venezuelan person with a gun drove up there to do a drive-by shooting and was put out of his way because he had to turn around and back up, that he couldn't go over the barrier. So it still does kind of work. But that's the history of that area, that there has been things going on in northwest Aurora for a very long time. There's a lot of organizations that have started, been funded, come, they go, the problems change. But this is not Aurora's first rodeo when it comes to dealing with serious stuff up in that part of the city. As far as these 3 apartments go, you know, that's what we're all waiting to find out. Is it's been really difficult to get a straight story from any of the sources, and takes a lot of digging from us, Denverite, 9 News, the Denver Post. Everyone has diligently been trying to get as much information as possible about the people that own these buildings and what really went on there. And from what we have determined so far in talking with police officers that have been there for a long time and worked in this neighborhood, people who live there, even a guy who owns an apartment building across the street from one of these 3 apartments owned by CBZ. is for the last 4 or 5 years, there has been an increasing amount of criminal activity in these buildings long before the Venezuelans started coming here from buses on Texas. And also that these 3 properties themselves have really been mismanaged and suffered from that. And there's been physical things with the buildings that were not taken care of, trash, on and on and on, the things that we've all read about. And those really did start and have been documented long before the Venezuelan migration to the metro area. And so it really leads credence to the story that this problem was created because of the lack of good management inside of there. There is no one that I know is denying that there were any Venezuelans living in these apartments, and a lot of them were essentially sent there because of some organizations in Denver that they had an agreement with CBZ, which owns these buildings, to fill vacant units. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it looked on its surface at this point to be something that worked for everybody. They had vacant units. These organizations in Denver had families that needed to be there. What we don't know at this point is what happened after they were placed. And that's a question I think a lot of the media is trying to answer, is did they come with contacts for help and social services, that, how much were they actually provided in free rent and for how long, and what was the expectation for these Venezuelan immigrants to fend for themselves after the free rent ran up. And everybody knows that at this point it's just nearly impossible to get your paperwork through quickly so you can get a work permit, right, and legally get out there, earn money, pay rent, and live just like the rest of us do. So a lot of those questions are something that we're focusing on, and I think a lot of the media are too, is how did this happen? What we are certain about, though, is that the residents and the city and the police are specific and have showed us continued evidence that there were all kinds of things that happened because of CBZ, and that they disregarded repairs, they disregarded who the renters were, they had vacant apartments, and there was no management inside the buildings that would go in there and find squatters and get the squatters out. On the other side, CBZ complains and goes, well, we would turn this over to police. We've yet to find a city in Colorado that takes care of landlord problems.
Right. Yeah, this was in the reporting this week around the subpoenas that were issued by the Attorney General to the management company that owns these properties. They're suing the AG's office to stop these subpoenas to try and, I assume, get to the bottom of some of this stuff and figure out who's really responsible. Is this all just part of that management company's effort to avoid responsibility for their mismanagement, do you think? Or what's going on with this sort of lawsuit to try and silence the AG's office or stop them from getting these subpoenas issued?
Just from having covered so many court cases in my career, I can tell you that this is pretty standard operating procedure, is to get your lawyers to go out there and create interference and make accusations in an effort to either distract from what the problems are or come up with an alternative narrative at the end of this as to here's what really happened, and it'll be their side of the story against a lot of others. But boy, you can't deny the fact that they immediately opened up a Twitter channel that they never had before for the sole purpose of providing what looks an awful lot like propaganda, trying to convince people of their narrative. And so they did that. All of a sudden, there was a story going around in some media that there was an investigation created by attorneys that were connected to CBZ, and that investigation came up with a whole lot of allegations. I would never, as a reporter, use the word investigation with what those were, that they were a narrative and a review of what the lawyers claimed to be evidence that supported their own side of the story and narrative of this whole thing. It was not an investigation. It was purported to be that. And so there are certain elected officials who went with that and then doubled down on that, saying, see, we told you this investigation, which was authorized and run by real honest-to-God lawyers, have come to the conclusion that we did too. And it was really difficult then to get in front of readers or anybody at that point and say, these are lawyers that work for people who stand to lose a huge amount of money. And that if you've been to a court case, when they have opening arguments, it sounds just like this. And so that's how we would characterize it, is that these were opening arguments in what's obviously going to be a lawsuit where they have their own narrative and that they're going to try and prove that the city through negligence in their police department, and they weren't operating in a way that wanted to serve the purposes of apartment owners that were responsible for what happened, that they allowed criminal elements to get in there, and then things happened.
I think a big reason this story became such a big deal nationally was that video footage of a couple of well-armed men stomping around in the hallways of one of the apartment complexes. What do we know about that clip particularly, and where that was, and what it was actually about?
We know a lot more now than we did when they first aired it, which was, we were trying to figure out if even it was real at this point, that since it did not come from police or anybody who had the ability or the drive to ensure that it was actual, that's how this whole thing started. It's like, are these actors? It's just, it's horrifying to watch that. It's like people and guns in an apartment building.
It's like a really big gun. That looks like a sniper rifle from like a battlefield, right? Like, yeah.
And what surprised me, it's like you got guns like this, and they went and they knocked on the door. And so that was the first question I had. It's like, wow, Welcome Wagon has really changed their stuff since the last time I saw them working. And then there was a narrative that went with this whole thing that they were doing something. It wasn't until days and weeks later that we found out that there was a shooting possibly associated with these guys in the apartment building, and that there was also video footage of somebody kicking in a door, and it wasn't the same door. And as this whole thing has come together, though, it really appears that these guys, we still don't know what they were actually doing or looking for specifically, but the idea was that there are people inside that apartment that they wanted to have some dealings with. And at the same time, there was already some kind of an altercation happening in the parking lot down below. And so these two things coincided within minutes of each other. Now we do know that some of these people are Venezuelan nationals, and they have been linked to the TDA gang. We're unsure if that's the case or not, but the allegation is there, and that there is some evidence that they have ratted out each other or something, and that somehow that narrative is stuck. But really, at the end of the day, since none of this has really been adjudicated, we haven't seen anything in court where somebody has an opportunity to see evidence and then question evidence. We just don't know for certain what it is that happened there. But there's no doubt that at this point, these guys were not there doing something fun or good at the time of day with the weapons that they had, and that they've been associated with other crimes.
This whole episode has created a bunch of new local political concerns. What are your thoughts about what this all says about Mayor Mike Kaufman, particularly supporting Trump again after essentially running against him in 2018 and saying, well, our city's not what you say it is, but then he goes and backs him again? What's the deal with Kaufman here?
I would say I have heard that question from people for the 30, 40 years that I have known and covered him, that, that Mike is a compelling and really interesting politician. And I have seen more times that Mike has said something or done something or taken a position that he has then backed off of. And in Congress, he did this when he was even in legislature, that he would have an opportunity to weigh in on something and then he would change his mind. And clearly, at one point, he found it compelling to push forward this narrative that there was a huge amount of Venezuelan immigrants, and that some, or maybe a lot of them, were causing real serious problems here in the city of Aurora. What interested us, and this is something that I've known about Mike for a long time, is he has sided with immigrants and immigrant communities for a very long time, and especially as a member of Congress. And he has counted on them for political support on more than one occasion. And some of those communities are the Ethiopian community, which is pretty large here in Aurora. And he, I think, is very popular with that community. The same time, I can remember covering a congressional debate with him where he spoke Spanish, and he's not a native Spanish speaker. And he did it on a Spanish-speaking televised network live broadcast, and I had to hand it to him. It's like, good for you. That takes some nerve to do that, and he did okay. He held his own. He was able to get the questions and answer the questions. So for a long time, I think Mike has had a very natural and genuine allegiance to immigrants here. And that's why I think a lot of people said that they were so surprised that he was taking the position he was, which was pretty much anti-immigration when it came to Venezuelan. It just seemed that he was on the bandwagon at one point, and especially with the narrative that councilperson Daniel Jurinsky was promoting, is that all hell has broken loose here in Aurora. And it started on July 28th at flash mob event at a shopping center here on the day that the dictator, President Maduro, was supposed to lose office. And that was the beginning of the end. And this has all been connected to that and one big thread. And then at one point, I don't know if it's because he saw the reality of the whole situation, that no, it's not that bad. And the police were really compelling in trying to convince the public and I think state lawmakers that this is a huge exaggeration, that there is a problem here, but it's nothing like what you're purporting it to be. And then when it caught fire nationally and the vice presidential and presidential candidates for the GOP really started giving it a lot of energy and it gained traction, and people started calling everybody here in Aurora that knew anyone outside of Aurora and saying, "Are you okay?
Right.
Can you even go to a grocery store at this point? Or are you afraid, do you need to come and spend some time out of state until this whole thing blows over?" And the reaction to that, I think, really took everybody aback, that, these are the kind of things that really can happen in a city like Aurora that, like I said, is no stranger to controversy through the theater shooting and the police action that had happened here. Everybody gets that. But no, I haven't talked to anybody who agrees that they have never seen anything like this. That the sheer force of national media and what Donald Trump is about and how that whole thing turned out really gave people something to think about that they never had before. And I can only imagine that at one point that whole thing went back to Kaufman, and he had to rethink, saying, I need to, even if I haven't been real specific about it before, I think he was clear that he came out and was concrete about a message that this was a problem caused by the apartment owners, and that there has not been any huge gang takeover anyplace in Aurora.
Do you think Kaufman has a motive for something else politically down the line? He is term limited as mayor. Is sticking with Trump, is there some sort of long-term goal for him?
I cannot imagine that. I don't know if you recall Mike Kaufman's departure from Congress, and he was one of the few Republicans in his last term to have the temerity to push back against Trump and the Trump administration. And he did that in a couple of ways. And even though he was a very strong and allegiant Republican to his caucus, he and a few other Republicans really got crosswise with Trump. And after Kaufman lost the election to Jason Crow, Trump got on social media and said, "So sorry, Mike." And that was,
it's hard to forget that.
And had other words too. So I think that there's no love lost. It was pretty obvious that when Trump was here for the rally and Mike Kaufman did not attend the rally, as a Republican or someone who would support the Trump campaign, that was pretty clear to me that wound has not healed.
I think it was "too bad, Mike," if I recall correctly.
Yes.
The exact quote.
Too bad.
So you mentioned it was sometime in June or July when this whole thing got kicked off, but the council or city council, the mayor's office, the police department all sort of issued this joint statement on September 11th of all dates that reads in part, "As for the perception and reality of public safety in Aurora, please understand that issues experienced at a select few properties do not apply to the city as a whole or large portions of it. Trendy Aguara has not taken over the city. The overstated claims fueled by social media and through select news organizations are simply not true. Again, TDA's presence in Aurora is limited to specific properties, all of which the city has been addressing in various ways for months." You brought up Councilwoman Jurinsky, so I want to bring up something she said here. She also chairs the council's public safety committee, and she signed on to this letter. It had the mayor's signature on it, as well as the city manager, the Aurora Police Department. But unlike Kaufman, she then did take the stage at this rally near the Gaylord, which is not in Aurora proper or anywhere near where these alleged incidents took place. And Lauren Boebert was there and Jeff Crank was there, and she essentially gave credence and credibility to some of these wild claims being made. So it kind of makes your head spin, because on the one hand, like, they're helping gin it up. On the second hand, they're trying to calm it down. And then when the cameras are rolling, she goes on Dr. Phil. She's at this big rally that's, televised and broadcast nationally. What's the angle here? And like, when does the sort of like proper administration of the city and the sense of safety experienced by its residents become more important than scoring political points and getting the spotlight and getting attention for this stuff?
The Sentinel editorial board has pointed out those same exact problems, is that this is a city council, city manager form of government. And first of all, it's misleading to people that there are committees that are really just creations of the city council, that their purpose is to forward legislation and give it a better sense of review so that it has some kind of analysis before it hits the council floor. The idea that the city council public safety committee has any powers at all, or any kind of ability to speak for the council at large or for the city, is really a misnomer. And that's where we took exception with the city management and the existing city council, saying that you're allowing members of city council to speak as if they are speaking for the city as a whole, or the city council. And if they are, then the city council needs to acknowledge that and say, the voice of Daniel Jurinsky is the voice of Aurora. And clearly that was not the case. The police department have pushed back repeatedly on her allegations. The city management office itself has come out and said these things are not true. And there are city council people, including the mayor now, who have done that. And so we question the city council, saying, why does this continue to happen then? That if, it's a matter of free speech and she's able to say anything she wants to anyone, but why is there not a concerted effort to toe the line to what the city council and the police and the mayor all clearly believe is that what she's purporting are wild exaggerations, and what she has offered is not backed up by evidence that we have seen at all. And even though, we'll be the first to admit that Councilperson Jurinsky has some valid points, and especially when it comes to how did this large population of Venezuelans come to live in 3 apartment buildings, and where else are they? And was there a deal made between ZVZ and some of these people, and did they make money that was somehow inappropriate? Those are all very valid questions. But everything that we've seen the police department do and the city management office has been backed up by evidence. That every time that the city says that they think that the CBZ has mismanaged these properties, they have provided us voluminous records and even photographs of horrendous things that nobody should have to live in. But we agree too, it's like if these agencies had federal money and their job was to find safe places for these people to live, were they diligent in doing that? If they'd gone to these buildings and looked at some of these apartment units, would they have felt safe in placing their own friends or family there? And so was there a problem on their part? Or were they misled, or that was just not their responsibility? But as far as Councilperson Jurinsky's insistence is, I'm just at a loss, and we've asked the city council to repeatedly be forward with this, that there needs to be a singular spokesperson that speaks for the city of Aurora and takes questions from the media so that there's the opportunity for us to press back on any kind of narrative or allegations they make.
Jurinsky indicated in a recent meeting that she was getting calls about Operation Aurora, perhaps from the incoming Trump administration. I watched that video and it was hard. I wasn't sure what she was really saying. Do you think she's getting actual calls from someone in Trump's orbit about this?
We asked and did not get a response to that question as to, is this the transition team? Is it Melania's dropping a dime to somebody here and saying, here's something you need to know? We are curious. And the biggest question we had is, does the Trump transition team, or whoever it is she's having conversations with, understand the structure of the city of Aurora? That going through a city council person to say, hey, Operation Aurora is on its way and be prepared, that just makes, I think, a lot of people nervous about how this is going to get rolled out if it's not going to be through official and standard channels. And so that was our press to find out for more information there. The same thing is, it's like, exactly what are you hearing? You know, that it was kind of coy in its messaging, saying, hey, I'm getting some phone calls and this is really going to happen. And she said that she was concerned the city was not taking it seriously, and wanted to make that known to the powers that be, that you need to take this seriously and answer phone calls or reach out or something. The one thing that she did say that was, I think, peculiar to a lot of people is she identified an Aurora police officer who is president of one of two of the city's police unions as someone who should be designated to coordinate Operation Aurora with the Aurora Police Department. And I think the police department themselves, from what we had heard, took exception to that. That's for them to determine what, if any, kind of role that they would have, especially in an operation that nobody really knows. Raised a lot of questions, though, about what do you know, and, you know, who else are you going to tell?
Right. So there is obviously, particularly before Trump takes office, a lot of concern about what Operation Aurora might really entail. What's the sense in Aurora broadly about what is coming next? Is there a real fear, real concern? Are people shrugging it off? What's the vibe?
I think it's everything. You know, one thing that we pointed out in a story not too long ago is, again, this is not Aurora's first rodeo with these kind of things. And in 2017, when Trump took power the first time, both of the school districts had several meetings that focused on what was going to happen if Trump made good on promises back then to do mass roundups. And if children were in school and their parents were taken away to an ICE facility, who was going to take care of these kids at 3:30 when everybody goes home? And so there was a real close look at that point. And I think a lot of people realized that it was bluster, that it never really happened. And so some of the folks that we talk to right now kind of have that sense like, yeah, been there, done that. And it's just talk. I was at an event with the police chief on Thursday night with a lot of community representatives. And one man was from a pretty, I would say, middle of the road Presbyterian church, that these were not wild activists by any means. And he attended this for the sole purpose of finding out that question, saying that we have members of our church who want to know now, will Aurora police come and harass, prosecute, or arrest them if they give aid or shelter to Venezuelan immigrants if this thing gets real and they are driving people away? And I was surprised that someone had had that level of conversation already, and especially someone who you would not expect that these were not immigration activists by any means, but within their own church community saw this as something akin to what had happened in Amsterdam or other places where people feel the need for either personal, philosophical, or religious reasons to step up and take care of people that they think are being handled unjustly. Other folks that we've talked to in Northwest Aurora that are living in these apartments, who are immigrants, who have mixed status within a family, or they have questionable status, they're horrified. There is real nervousness here. And the police department has made it really clear that their concern is that this type of narrative and talk drives people underground, and that there are people who are afraid that they're going to be deported because their employer will out them as being undocumented immigrants. So they're worried they're going to have to quit their job or should quit their job. The police chief himself has said on more than one occasion that these kind of narratives are dangerous in that they make people desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. And one is they could become victims of all kinds of crimes. And if there are Trent Aragua folks here who specifically are looking for fellow Venezuelans or South American immigrants to abuse, that they become much easier targets knowing that they will not dial 911.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's this like swirling shitstorm where you don't know the truth, you don't know who's saying what, you don't know who knows what, you don't know who's doing it for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, or trying to help or trying to hurt. And this is where we get really concerned. I mean, outside of this specific episode, the mayor and the city council have really been running amok in a political sense in Aurora for quite some time now. It's a bit of a long story, but like, Aurora is the only major city in the state that's controlled by Republicans. It's the third largest city in Colorado. Last election cycle for the city council, Mayor Mike Kaufman essentially coordinated dark money to support his chosen candidates, including one who just recently resigned to take a job with a consulting firm who runs some of the same dark money groups. What do you think is the main reason that conservatives have had political successes in Aurora when they've basically been devastated everywhere else in Colorado? Is it as simple as like Mike Kaufman's got it all together and he picks his people and they go spend money to get them elected, or is something else going on?
I think the explanation as far as Mike Kaufman goes is he was a really well-known quantity when he ran for mayor the first time. He, was from Aurora and had been through the state house, the state senate, treasurer. I mean, the guy was pretty much a household name, even for people who weren't tied into politics on a regular basis. And when he ran for mayor the first time, he won that race by dozens of votes. I think it was
like 42 votes or something, right? Yeah.
It was a really close race against Omar Montgomery, who was a political unknown running a race that did not get a lot of high profile. So I think that, that the argument that, Mike has the allegiance of just a lot of people, I don't know that that's what that showed. What I know in talking with Democratic and Republican officials in Arapahoe and Adams County and on a state level is that everybody sees this as an issue because these are essentially nonpartisan races, officially nonpartisan. And so there is no R or D at the end of these people's names when you vote for them. And because the proof is pretty compelling that when there is an R or D on the end of a candidate, the Ds do extraordinarily well here. Even in a place where they are the majority of the two parties, but the majority of voters across Aurora and in both counties are unaffiliated voters. And so it's a pretty good argument to make that there are people who sign with the Democratic Party and the work that they have done. The issue is whether or not to fix that, and the past city council, when there were progressives on the majority for a brief time, and also at least being able to hold their own, wanted to change that they think that it's something that voters who do not have the ability to pay much attention to these kind of issues, that it's a clue or a cue that helps them understand who the candidate is. Clearly, and we said this in editorials from the editorial board as well, is that a lot of the work that some of the city council does is not representative of the community as we, and I think most people know it, and that they have taken positions and done things that most people would disagree with. And so it's hard to make an argument that they are representative of the community, but it's also impossible to deny that these are people who were elected to represent their community. And, former city council person Juan Mercado has pointed out, it's like buyer beware. It's like elections have consequences. And if you don't pay attention to who's running or what dark money or non-dark money is supporting a candidate, then you find out after.
We actually had Juan on the show when he was running against Kaufman for mayor, and he brought up the same point. So I'm curious, actually, like, do you think we should have partisan municipal elections in Colorado so that voters do have a better sense of who they're voting for? I don't think there's a single Republican in office, from Arapahoe County commissioner to the state house, who is actually a Republican when it comes to being elected on a partisan basis. So you, Dave Perry, I mean, do you have a thought about this? Like, should we have partisan municipal elections in Colorado?
I don't know that I think that party politics would provide any advantage to running a government any more than it does other types of races that, outside of the state house, where people caucus because of their party, and there's a lot that I think is beneficial because of that, and a lot that works against getting stuff done. But I think there is absolutely no harm in telling voters on the ballot who is registered with a party and who is not. And whether or not that's the same thing as running a partisan race, I don't think it is. There is no shortage of partisan politics on this city council, and I'd say most city councils right now. That,
regardless.
The Republicans here caucus. Even if they drop from that party, it's very clear that This is from the comments they make about partisan politics and partisan philosophy and party planks down to the very measure that they support on both sides, Democrats and Republicans both. There's an allegiance there and a caucus. And so I think it would benefit voters to understand that at the time they're looking at their ballot and understand who has an allegiance to one party or the other.
So I want to ask about the Aurora Police Department, which has had, I think, 5 different police chiefs since 2022. Are they picking the wrong people? Are the wrong people applying? What's going on?
I would say, that's the $60,000 question on a lot of levels, but it's a lot of different things. Primarily, that's going to be the worst job in the world. I just cannot imagine trying to please that many masters, and running a newspaper is no fun either. Boy, you've got a city council that it can't agree upon themselves what they want from a police department. And so they're, accountable to 11 different people and opinions that in reality sign the check. But the way that Aurora is set up, in theory, that's not his boss or her boss. That person reports to a deputy city manager and ultimately the city manager. So right now you've got 13 people telling you what to do, and then you've got a community as diverse and as committed to their causes as Aurora, and they're split there. And there are people who really want to see a crackdown, a criminal crackdown. I think a good example of how this looks is Councilperson Stephanie Hancock recently passed through a bill that allows the police or compels police to tow your car away if you're pulled over and you don't have a driver's license, proof of insurance, and a valid license plate. And initially they got 6 cars in one day, and everybody opposed to this was saying, hey, this is just picking on poor people, and especially poor immigrant people who can't get stuff together anyway. They're able to at least go get a car. Don't take it away that they can't, go find a job or something. And it turns out what the police chief told me is that those first 6 people were, 1, white, and they all were employed. And everybody was pretty surprised, like, wow, we didn't see how that was going to come down. Now they have towed and impounded up to 200 cars in the first month. And so we're trying to analyze that to take a look at who are these people and who's driving around without the triple threat, all at one time. And what does that mean? But there has been a hurrah from a lot of Aurora saying, yes, that's what we want, is to penalize people for breaking the law for whatever reason it is. And that's why there's been support with increased mandated jail sentences for shoplifting, and walking off on your $15 bar tab will allow you to qualify for a jail term in Aurora now. Those kind of things really sing to people. So you've got a police chief who has to report to that community saying, you want to, get tough mentality. At the same time, at this meeting I was at, there was a large representation of people from different Black communities who were making it really clear that the current police chief may be listening to what they have to say, but he's not hearing what they have to say. And they have been consistent in this, saying, we really want a police chief that understands that what happened over the last few years that ended up in a consent decree from the Attorney General really did happen. And they're feeling that the police chief candidates that come before them at this point are on one side or the other. Either are somewhat dismissive of it, saying, yeah, every police department has its bad apples and we just need a way to weed them out. Or there are people that say, we really messed this up, and we created a community of police officers here who were allowed to conduct themselves in the way that they did, and that there was nobody that compelled other officers who saw this, that disliked it, to report it and prevent it. And a change in state law, the consent decree, and some of those things have modified that. In the meantime, you've got police chiefs coming in, tap dancing their way around all of these things, none of them successful. But I know that there's an argument, too, that Councilperson Cherinsky, who is the most vocal person on city council when it comes to these type of issues, is not shy about making her displeasure with some of the things that the police chief has done in the past, the interim police chiefs, that would side away from to get tough on crime and support the issues primarily of the police unions. And the allegation has been there. No one has shown us proof one way or the other that type of behavior eventually wins out, that either a city manager or the city council is going to want to make a change just to get it out of the public's eye, this constant fighting among the police about how they're going to handle the consent decree and reform and take care of a city that has a lot of very serious criminal problems.
Well, I think if Aurora is looking for a new motto, the land of many truths would not be a bad one. It is an inscrutable city that you cover, but we are just grateful for your time and your expertise and for letting us know all this. Before we let you go, we met on Blue Sky, which we refer to as Good Twitter. So I know we can find you, Editor Dave Perry, that's your handle, Editor Dave Perry on Blue Sky, and the old bad Twitter, and your newspaper is at sentinelcolorado.com. Anywhere else where folks should be paying attention to your work or the work of your good newspaper?
We're on Mastodon and Threads on those same handles.
Very good. Well, Dave Perry, editor of the Aurora Sentinel, thank you so much for coming on the Get More Smarter podcast. We live in the West. We live in Lakewood, so we should probably hop on over the city and come see you sometime in real life. But thank you so much for spending time with us today. It was great to talk to you. We appreciate all your insights.
And if you need caldo recipes or something like that, just hit us up.
Hell yeah.
We have food from across the planet.
Absolutely, yes. I'm a big fan of your pierogi joint specifically.